Well, hey, Mark and Jenny, glad you are joining us today. Just tell us a little bit about your kids.
Well, we've got five kids, and our oldest is 19, and our youngest is now
Seven.
seven. So 19 down to seven, and they go boy, girl, all the way down. So,
All right, so you got them across the spectrum. That's incredible. Um, so, in your parenting, you got one who as is ending teenage. Sounds like you probably have one or two in the teenage realm, and then elementary. So you've got the gamut. Um, when you're parenting them, how do you establish what guidelines are important for them and for you guys?
Go ahead.
well, as we've already talked about, we did start with what the end goal was, or what we wanted the end result to be for them. And so you do have to start there to know what is it you're trying to create or develop in your children. And so we knew from the beginning the guidelines that we wanted to put in place to begin to shape their heart and to shape their character. And that was probably the biggest thing for us is, we can worry about their grades in school and learning math and English and all that. But the greatest skill that we can really develop in them is really to have great character, to have great integrity, to have a good work ethic, to be honest, but ultimately, for us, it was that we want kids to leave our home knowing and following Jesus, and we don't just teach that, but we have to model that.
Well, and also we're also foster parents, and we have been for 9 years. And any child that comes into our home, we would like to pour as much as we can while we have them into them, and even having those kids that have come from trauma, having to learn to discipline, or not discipline, but set boundaries for them that might be different than the kids that have been in our home since birth. So we have to kind of find the balance of that as well.
So, what are some of those guidelines or some boundaries, if you will, or some guardrails that your if your kids would go, this, mom and dad, this is important to them. What are some of those that are just kind of staples in your home?
Well, we really believe that starts at birth, that you actually begin discipline at birth. And that doesn't mean that we're spanking kids or grounding kids at birth, but we do believe discipline starts very early, and that guidelines are really what shapes their character and how they relate to other people. And so in our home, it would just be, big ones are treating other people with respect. We're big on, we want them to use manners, especially use manners when they're addressing adults and operating with adults. Bedtime and just order in our home of how we do things. What else would you add to that?
I think also we try to look at each child's personality and what they can handle. I always laugh because I look at each of my kids and I can say, like, my firstborn, who's 19, college kid, he was so by the books. Any book you read, he did exactly by the book. And then you have my secondborn, who was ahead of a book. She's a girl. She just did everything ahead of the book. And then I got to my third kid. He's not even in a book. So I have had to find ways to work with each personality and each kid and how they can handle responsibility. Something that Mark and I have always taught in any parenting classes that we've done is we parent with a funnel in mind. And you think of a funnel is it starts off narrow and it broadens up high. A lot of families, they funnel backwards, and they start with the funnel upside down. And what that funnel looks like is you start with their boundaries a lot smaller the younger they are. And then the older they get, the more responsibility they can have, the bigger their boundaries, and it gets to where it's a funnel. So by the time they're leaving our house, they have a lot more freedom, a lot less boundaries, because they've been able to handle those responsibilities the older they've gotten.
But, so the way we say it, and Chris, you've experienced this, by the way, but the way we would say it is it's always easier to start tight, and then over time, as they show their ability to handle, you give them more and more freedom. So, it's that funnel idea. But as a student pastor, Chris, in the past, you've experienced parents that are bringing their kids to you at 13 years old, and they're completely out of control, and they're saying, "Fix my child."
Yeah.
And what they're really trying to do is they started loose. In many situations, they started loose, and now they're trying to tighten down. And boy, you can do it, but it's almost impossible if you try to do it that way.
Yeah, you tend to lose the relationship at that point because it's so backwards to them. So how do you communicate these to your kids? How do you let them know where the boundaries are? Because I know a lot of parents who are like, we know we need to create these boundaries and establish these boundaries. And man, what do we do? How do we communicate these?
Well, especially if there have not been any boundaries to begin with, I always tell parents, choose one area. What area is driving you bananas, whether it's disobedience, lying, just those kind of things. You choose that area and you focus on that area. Don't try to do everything all at once and decide you're going to do a boot camp at your house, because that is going to fail for the fact that you're going to get frustrated. They're going to get frustrated. Start with one area that is very frustrating to you and then focus on that. And then you can add another area behind that and go on from there.
We actually have a chalkboard that hangs at the foot of the stairs that go up to where the kids' rooms are, everything upstairs. And on that chalkboard, we actually have family rules listed there. And they're just, again, they're not hard and fast legalistic rules, but they're guidelines for how we operate in our family. And so, the idea is that the kids see those every time that they're going up the stairs to their room. Yeah. And sometimes we go over there and even point them out and talk to them. But I think it's really, really important that when you communicate guidelines to your kids, that you're not communicating, we've already kind of talked about this, but just hard and fast rules, because rules are going to create rebellion eventually. Mm-hmm. But if they know you're doing it out of love, that's a whole different story. And it doesn't mean they're always going to cooperate and do it willingly. But we always want to communicate to them. We want to treat them the way that God treats us. And that is a lot of grace, that no matter what you do, it doesn't change our relationship. Right. You're still my child. I still love you. I don't think any differently of you, but we do have to address your behavior, Yeah. And we always want to communicate it with that love and grace.
Well, we were just talking to our 19-year-old son just about this, what the series is, or the sermon was, and just asking him, what would you say to someone if they came and asked you, what did your parents do right, or what did they do wrong? And he said, you guys weren't my friends. You were my parents. But the older I've gotten, the more of a friendship we've developed. And that's true. I mean, we weren't his buddy. I wasn't looking to be his most popular, friend. I wanted to be his mom, and left it that way, and disciplined in that way. And then the older he got, the more those boundaries have come down, and we can do things more as adults together.
That's good. So you talk about sometimes you took them over to your family rules, which I'm dying to know what those are. But
the last one.
What'd you say?
The last rule Macy wrote down: do not leave 15 seconds on the microwave. She added that one because it drives her bananas when there's time left in the microwave. Go ahead.
How did you enforce those boundaries? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, we try to be clear up front that here is the guideline or rule or whatever you want to say it. And when that guideline is not being followed, here's the consequence. Or when you cross that line, here's the consequence. And in our home, when they're young, there's certain types of behavior that are pretty much always going to result in some kind of a spanking. There's others that we don't consider to be as much a willful act of disobedience as much as immaturity or something like that, and that may not have quite as harsh of a discipline. It may be a little bit more, you've lost a certain toy, or you're grounded from something for a certain period of time or something like that.
Yeah, the punishment will fit the crime.
Right.
And sometimes there are just natural consequences to our actions. So we kind of okay, that's the result of you doing A, B, and C. So.
Well, guys, I thank you so much. In any other, just in this idea of guidelines, any last word you would give to a parent out there, whether it be a parent of a brand new baby, or a parent who has elementary kids, and maybe they're going, okay, we've got to do something like this. Where do we start? Jenny, you talked about starting with one thing, but what any last bit of advice you would give parents in this area of setting guidelines?
I think some of our family rules, obviously they've kind of morphed over the years. When your rules when they're little can look totally different than when they're in teenagers. Right. So there have been times that we've had family powwows. Okay, I am not happy with what's going on here. Let's talk about it. And some of that is the result of some of our rules are the result of those powwows, talking about, okay, let's try harder here. We're going to, let's remind you up here with this rule, whatever. So having those family meetings and opening up the discussion, if you're in the funnel and they're at that point where they have that responsibility to be able to handle those discussions.
Right.
So I'll leave it with two pieces of advice that people that were older than us gave to us. One of them is a quote you may have heard before, but it is that when you have young children, the days are long, but the years are short. And that's always just a good reminder to me to, it's easy to get worn down and tired and give up on maintaining discipline and guidelines in your home and all that. But the reality is, if you'll do the hard work when they're young, it's a little bit easier when they get older. It's never super easy, but it's better. And you'll have that friendship when, they get to be where our son is at 19 or 20, and you really want that. The other piece of advice we got was to make sure when it comes to parenting, or really any relationship, that you respond rather than react, which really means there's a level of self-control as parents and how you're going to respond to how your children's behave. And so that keeps you from anger, that keeps you from being harsh. And it really is that you are maintaining control. You have a plan, you know what you're doing. And so you can respond in those situations rather than reacting. And that makes a huge difference over time.
Man, all that's great. And I appreciate it. I know I've got two young ones, and I take all of that I can get. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.